Morning glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. Hugh Hewitt live in California this morning. The end of the first year of Joe Biden's presidency. He was inaugurated on January 20th of 2021 and to January 19th of 2022. 1 year in, it is a disaster. The news of the morning is very ominous. From the Reuters news service comes, Blinken arrives in Ukraine, says Russia could attack on a short notice. From there, he's going to go on to Geneva to meet with the Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov. The prospect of a war in Central Europe should alarm you. It seems as though a lot of legacy media is treating this as, oh, no big deal, they'll take over Ukraine. This war will not be easy for Russia, and it could spiral, and it will have consequences. Blinken is meeting Lavrov, even as the Washington Post reports that the White House warns that Moscow could attack Ukraine, quote, at any point. Sanctions are planned, but sanctions won't stop Putin. The United Kingdom has gone into crisis mode and is flying emergency weapons to Ukraine, according to the Telegraph. The Foreign Office has been told to prepare for crisis mode as weapons were flown from Britain to Ukraine to defend from a Russian invasion. Joe Biden is now thought to be weighing up new options. Great! New options from the infirm president. Germany finally got off of the fence and said it may halt Nord Stream 2 if Russia invades Ukraine. You know what would help? If they blew up Nord Stream 1 the day a tank rolls into Ukraine. I am just saying, wars are inexplicably complicated. They never, ever, I can't explain to you how many times they've gone a different direction than what people imagined. The most obvious being the Guns of August, where everyone expected a short, brief clash along the Belgium-Atlantic border as the last man on the right's sleeve touches the channel. That's the famous directive in the German war plan. And 4 years and millions later, people were dead and the country was, Germany and Britain were exhausted. France was a burnt over rubble. And everyone said, how did that happen? I'm reading H.R. McMaster's book on Vietnam, another series of stumbles and blunders. And it is simply, it's a big day if Putin pulls the plug. And weakness is provocative. Joe Biden is weak. His team is weak. Putin knows it. He dared not do this with Trump in the White House. He could not predict how Trump would react. He's doing it with Biden in the White House. That's your takeaway on year number one of Biden. Also in Great Britain, the Prime Minister could be out by the end of the day, even though he'll remain a caretaker Prime Minister. I'm reading from the Telegraph moments ago. Further members of the 2019 Red Wall intake of Conservative members of Parliament have submitted letters of no confidence in Boris Johnson this morning. One MP told the Telegraph 11 letters had been submitted to the 1922 committee, and that comments overnight from ministers attacking them as fools was the final straw. Quote, senior ministers' comments saying we were fools have taken most over the edge. They would have done better to reach out rather than lash out. While party whips thought the number of letters of no confidence was in the 20s, that figure has now risen by as much as a third. A source close to 2019 intake added, some are waiting until after Prime Minister's questions, which will occur during the show. Dwayne will keep his eye when Boris Johnson takes the podium. We'll bring you some of that. It requires, I believe, 54 letters from the 247 members of Parliament to trigger a confidence vote. 54 letters. If those 54 letters are received by the 1922 committee, which is the Conservative members of Parliament, they have to hold a no confidence vote, as was held in Theresa May. The rebel MPs, according to the Telegraph, are plotting to oust Boris even as he tries to scrap COVID restrictions in his country. Yesterday, Rishi Sunak, who's the number 2 official, the Chancellor of the Exchequer in Great Britain, refused to give Boris Johnson his full backing, which is a telltale sign that the maneuvering is underway. So we will watch Putin, we will watch Johnson throughout the morning and bring you breaking news as it occurs. In a related story, because it's related to the dire situation Joe Biden has brought with him to the White House, athletes are warned against speaking up on human rights at the Beijing Games. Incredibly. Athletes traveling to next month's Beijing Olympics were warned Tuesday on speaking up on human rights issue while in China for their own safety at a Human Rights Watch. They could be thrown in jail. They could be disappeared. On the domestic front, I was on Special Report last night, and the Biden administration made a hash of COVID. The Washington Post reports this morning that a year ago, Joe Biden unveiled a 200-page plan to defeat COVID. He has struggled to deliver on key promises. You think? Delta, Omicron have come along. The masks are being made available now. It's too late to help. Omicron will have swept through, done its damage, killed 100,000 people or however many people are dying, made millions more sick, rendered the economy, supply chain a disaster. And people are saying, oh, he's not very good at this. The key is that Pfizer has a new pill, COVID-19, which will work against Omicron in the lab. Merck's got one, AstraZeneca, but there seems to be no urgency at all on Team Biden. Here I am with Brett Baer last night, cut number 24 on Special Report.
Hugh. I don't think they focused on the right thing, Brett. The good news today is Pfizer has tested its antiviral pill, and it works against Omicron. We expect Merck and AstraZeneca also to have antiviral pills that will work against Omicron, which is 99% of the cases. Dr. Walensky continues to hide in her safe spaces with the New York Times and the big media. She doesn't go out and talk to people. What they ought to be doing is posting up these antivirals, getting the expectation high that people are going to get sick and then they're going to get better, and they ought to be using the Defense Production Act or any tool that they can to rapidly get these pills distributed, because those are therapeutics that'll be widely available and easy to take and will be a metric as opposed to tests that will actually show that something good is happening.
And what I mean by that is that this testing metric, go to our website and get tests. I suppose that's okay if you want to know if you've got Omicron and should stay home. It doesn't cure anybody. It doesn't stop anything. The assumption is that people will stay home. They won't. They don't feel sick. People don't even know. Even if they get the test, they'll get them too late. Guy Benson explained this at length, that when people in his family were sick, they couldn't find a test. And it just is it's a mess. It's a giant. And so they roll out a website giving you free tests. Well, that's great. That's good. That doesn't do anything to stop the spread. Meanwhile, children are still masked. On Guy Benson's radio show yesterday, I want to play you this. He had on, I've got to find the cut here, Dr. Marty Makary talking about, and he will be an advisor to Glenn Youngkin about these masks, cut number 19.
Yeah, I think we've had this assumption that masks are totally benign, that you could mask somebody for their entire childhood and there would be zero downsides. We've had that assumption from much of our public health guidance. Well, it turns out that the data are now pretty clear that the cloth masks are really not doing much in terms of reducing transmission. And by the way, we have an acknowledgement now that everybody will get Omicron. It's just it's that ubiquitous that it's basically almost unavoidable. Now, that's not saying people should resign themselves to it. It's good to use good public health hygiene. But we have covered the faces of children for 2 years with really no data to support the cloth masks. And many of us were saying, hey, look at the particle size of an aerosolized virus with COVID. It's about 3 to 5 microns. And look at the pore size of the cloth masks. It's 10 to 20 microns. And so we've always said the quality of the mask matters. The question is, what's the role of the parents here?
That is the question. Joe Biden should be asked that question at a press conference today. He'll probably get softballs. They always get softballs. Aren't the Republicans racist, Mr. President? I think we can count on Yamiche to come up with that one. But more coming up, America, as I bring you the news on the end of the first year of the Biden presidency. I'm Hugh Hewitt live. Mike Gallagher, Congressman extraordinaire from Wisconsin. I packed up your gear, your Packers gear. I gave it to Dwayne. I think Dwayne hasn't sent it yet. I think he's trying to jinx your Packers.
Well, I'm worried you put like a hex on the gear. So this is going to be a dilemma as to whether I open it before Saturday night's game. I'm sort of worried about, if you've ever seen the end of the movie Seven, I'm sort of envisioning as I open this box, what's in the box, Hugh? What's in the box? So
the only thing that's in there is what you sent. But I don't know that if you lose your juju, as we say, we always watch the game when the Browns win. My boys and I always watch the game in exactly the same place and exactly the same arrangement and with the same dog when they win. When we lose, we shake it up. So I'm not sure what you did by sending me your Green Bay Packers gear. The juju may be very bad, my friend.
I know. Well, just as long as you don't shake up the dog after you win, Hugh, you're all right.
No, we don't. We don't.
Okay. Good.
Let's talk about Ukraine because Secretary Blinken is there. The troops are massing. We're getting every kind of signal that they will invade today. What amazes me, Congressman, is everyone assumes that this could not go wrong. It's sort of like a 1914 mindset. You know, Putin will roll in, he'll take over Ukraine, and that'll be that. It may not be so.
No, it could spiral out of control easily. What's interesting is I had some colleagues in the Senate who recently came back from Ukraine, and their comment was that among the Ukrainian people, their level of concern actually doesn't match our own. And I was sort of digging into that because that surprised me. And I think the argument was that they've just become so used to this near constant level of crisis because effectively Putin's been engaged in low-level conflict, which is at times high-level conflict, a quasi-invasion for years now, since at least 2014. And I just think it's dangerous to get complacent, both inside of Ukraine and outside Ukraine, because as much as we might like to think this can't spiral out of control, it absolutely could. And just the damage, we've talked about numerous times on this program, Hugh, the damage to American credibility globally, the way in which this would completely undermine the credibility of our commitments around the world. And I know that there's a big argument about NATO expansion and the extent to which we should prioritize it or not prioritize it. The fact is we made promises about the sovereignty of Ukraine's territorial integrity when we got them to forswear nuclear weapons. And I do think this would deal a very damaging blow to American credibility, and that would have cascading effects around the world. So this is a time where we have to be on high alert. And again, the Biden administration is just stuck in this bizarre model UN paradigm where sternly worded statements and Victoria Nuland out there saying that the Russians need to focus on building back better or threatening economic sanctions after the fact is somehow going to change Putin's calculus. That's not going to do the trick. So we have to change our approach. I actually hope in Biden's reset speech, we also get a reset of American foreign policy, because that's been an absolute disaster a year into Biden's presidency. And until he and his team start getting tough, until he starts replacing some of his team with some people that actually understand hard power and how geopolitics works, I fear we're going to get more of this aggression around the world.
Couple of headlines from the Telegraph this morning. UK goes into crisis mode as weapons flown to Ukraine to defend against Russian invasion. It speculates Joe Biden might send some now. And then Germany in the New York Post. Germany signals it may halt Nord Stream 2 if Russia invades Ukraine. That's not going to do the trick either. You've got to say, if you invade, we blow up both pipelines and we'll shiver. The United States will get us what we need. We'll turn the nukes back on and we're done with you. You've got to send lethal aid from the United States. You've got to airlift if you want to deter him. But I think they're fatalistic. They're preparing the battleground of American politics, not Ukraine, by getting us to resign our fact to a fait accompli, I think, Mike Gallagher. They want to be seen as doing things when, in fact, they're not doing anything.
I agree 100%, and I just would look at the ongoing cyber warfare that's going on in Ukraine right now as evidence that we're well beyond phase 0 in this operation, and we've already been caught flat-footed. And think of the enormous leverage that Putin has already created, right? He's already sort of shifted the goalposts in his directions, and I'm very worried, Hugh, to your point, about a strain of thinking on the right that suggests, well, if you sort of look at the big geopolitical chessboard, you know, we have to find a way to align with Russia against China over the long term. Okay, indeed, it would be nice if we could pull off some sort of Nixon goes to China, but this time with Russia vis-a-vis China. However, the current leadership of Russia makes that impossible. and our interests at present simply do not align. And if anything, our unwillingness to stand up to Russian aggression only whets their appetite. The appetite grows with the eating, and we've seen, when not faced with a resolute response from America, not only has Russian aggression increased, but they've actually intensified their cooperation with China. So I think this idea on the isolationist left and right that somehow we can turn a blind eye to Putin's depravity because over the long term China is the real threat really misunderstands the current geopolitical moment. I agree that China is overwhelmingly our top threat. But for America, the world's sole superpower, we have to be able to deter China while also, with an economy of force effort in concert with our allies, deterring Russia's territorial incursion into Europe and deterring Russia's continued attempts to completely destroy NATO in the process. And we can do both if we get creative and if we put some steel in the spine of our European allies who are now dangerously dependent upon Russian oil and gas.
Now, I am curious what you think President Zelensky is going to do. I just think we are underestimating the instability that could come from the tanks rolling across frozen fields. I don't know what Zelensky's cyber capabilities are. I don't know what his offensive capabilities are. But everyone who's ever predicted how a war would go has been wrong. We got it wrong in 2003. We were met with people who cheered us for about a couple of months, and then it was civil war. I don't think the Ukrainians will go gently into the night. They are the Western Ukrainians are distinct ethnically, linguistically, and culturally and nationally from Russians.
It's also a tough people, Hugh. I mean, who've been under enormous strain and pressure for the last few years, and honestly have been conducting hybrid warfare for the last 2 years. So, I mean, I agree that it's not just that the Russian tanks are going to, stroll into Kyiv easily, or that even a coup attempt in Kyiv is going to be perfectly successful. I think we could be at the opening stages of a much more prolonged and intensified conflict that could engulf not just the rest of the country, but a lot of countries on the periphery of Ukraine. So it's so dangerous to allow vacuums like this to open up and to allow your enemies to get away with stuff like this. And I can't help but think back on what we saw during the Trump administration, where despite the narrative from the mainstream media that Trump was a puppet of Putin and we were going to have a weak Russia policy, I don't know if there was a better moment for our deterrent posture vis-a-vis Russia than when we killed a bunch of Russian mercenaries in Syria or even in other parts of the world, when we took lethal action against Qasem Soleimani and made all these hard decisions to employ conventional hard power. That's the type of stuff that a thug like Putin notices, that a thug like Xi Jinping notices. I think, again, to go back to the fundamental flaw of the Biden administration's foreign policy, I think there's this group of people that think diplomacy is an end in and of itself. Everything can be negotiated at Davos or, at the UN General Assembly, and don't understand that in most parts of the world, people still predominantly care about hard power. And as Frederick the Great said, diplomacy without armaments is like music without instruments. And right now, we're playing a lot of music without instruments, and our enemies and our allies increasingly aren't taking us seriously.
Last question, Congressman Gallagher. I am amazed at the indifference to the reality of what's going on. Now, you're right. If Trump had been a Putin puppet, Putin would have invaded during Trump's tenure. He wasn't. He didn't. He's doing so now. However, the Rump Committee, the so-called Select Committee, and it's just a Rump Committee, continues to issue press releases that the American media continues to obsess about Trump. Do you think this press conference today will be serious, or will it be another series of softballs for the president to hit, fly balls to center field?
Well, unless they let Ducey ask a question, I think it's just going to be softballs. I mean, and look, every Sunday, Hugh, the spokespeople for the administration, because obviously they don't want to put Joe Biden in front of the press to get asked hard questions.
They can't.
Whether it's Fauci or Walensky or take your pick, unless they're going on Brett Baer's show, and I thought Brett did a great job with Walensky, They're not being
Yes,
asked
he did.
basic questions about the pandemic, right? I mean, Fauci in particular continues to get away with a complete lack of transparency, and I would argue straight up lying to Congress in certain interactions. And the fact that he's still there at the forefront of this effort boggles the mind, Hugh. And
Can I tell you a quick story? After they announced a new Turning the Leaf, I, of course, sent out the obligatory invitation to Dr. Walensky, and her team said, no, we're not coming on your show. Dr. Fauci's team said he's never coming back because I wrote critical of him. They are the most thin-skinned public health officials I've ever seen. They are actually afraid to go to civilized but nevertheless pointed conversation. They're never going to persuade anyone of anything.
And we're 2 years into this, more than 2 years, and the CDC still can't answer basic questions about how many people hospitalized are there because of COVID or with COVID. We don't have transparency on all of the funding that went to the EcoHealth Alliance. Peter Daszak has not been forced to testify in front of the Congress of the United States. Fauci continues to spout dangerous nonsense like, I represent science, you can't question the science. I mean, all of this is absurd. And it is, I believe, intended precisely to shut down dissent, which is, of course, the most unscientific position that you could have right now. And so no wonder the president's poll numbers are lingering near 33%. Hugh, it's hard to get 70% of the country to agree that the sky is blue. Biden has actually fulfilled his pledge that he said a year ago in his inauguration, that his soul is in the process of uniting the country. The problem is he's united the country against his agenda, which is completely out of step with where common sense Americans are right now. And common sense Americans don't want school shutdowns. They're tired of all this competence from our public health establishment, and they just want honesty from our public officials, and that's not what they're getting. Case in point right now, the United States Senate, where we're getting crazy lies about voter suppression in America. It is gaslighting at the highest order.
And I filled up the 3/4 of a tank of gas on the way to do special report yesterday, $85. That concentrates the mind wonderfully. Representative Gallagher, good luck on Saturday night. The box is on its way, but I don't know what you did to your luck. We'll see. Congressman Mike Gallagher. Follow him on Twitter at Rep Gallagher. Whoa, American. David Davis is a name you do not know, but he is a Tory of great stature. Having served as Secretary of State for exiting the European Union, he's been a member of Parliament for many years. He just called on Boris Johnson to go. It's quite the morning in the British Parliament. Brian Wesbury joins me. I don't think any of the reporters today will ask the president to go, Brian. But what do you want? What do you want someone to ask him today? I went on special report last night. I did research on the way to Brett Baer's show. I paid $85 for 3/4 of a tank of gas. To me, that seems to be the most important political fact in America, is that gas is at $5 a gallon, give or take a nickel in California.
Yeah, you know what I would like to ask is do you think any of your policies have created the problems that we have right now? Supply chain issues, inflation, high gas prices, high food prices, the fact that people are in a sense, kind of holding out, coming back to work. Are there any policies that you put in place that would have caused that? And if so, will you change them?
Excellent question. The answer is it would be incoherent, but he would not own up to that. Now, Brian, the markets have been roiled by the fact the Fed's going to raise rates 3 times this year, maybe 4. How long does the sell-off continue for? Because I actually don't think that's an underlying issue for equities.
Right, at least not right now. You know, Hugh, this is I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole, but Milton Friedman, who won the Nobel Prize in the 1970s, told the world, educated the world, that monetary policy is what causes inflation. About 18 months ago, Jerome Powell, the chairman of our Federal Reserve, told Senator Kennedy in a hearing that we need to unlearn this idea that money affects inflation. And so, you know, I hear the Fed saying we're going to taper, we're going to stop buying bonds. I hear the Fed saying we're going to raise rates, but but I'm not sure if they've now become monetarists, if they truly understand the issue, or if they just want to try to do something to show that they care.
Now, Brian, assume for a moment that they are really back to orthodoxy and they want to drain the money out. Interest rates will not do that. How do they get the excess money out, and how much pain does that mean? Because it is, I think you've used the heroin addiction. We're going to have a hell of a withdrawal whenever it starts.
That's exactly right. We've been, if you're in a car accident, they jam a bunch of morphine in you, and you don't know anything's wrong until it wears off. And so you're absolutely right. And the way that they do it, there's the simple way, and that is what they do is they would sell bonds to banks. Banks would then pay for those bonds with the cash that they have on hand, which a lot of it is sitting at the Fed, and the Fed could just destroy it. It would be the reverse process of what they've already done. The problem is the Fed thinks that would be abrupt. So what they're going to do is they're going to let the bonds mature slowly but surely. And as, let's say 20 billion bonds mature on a Friday, they might absorb 5 billion of those and then let the other 15 billion go out. So we'll have to wait and see.
Brian, what do you think if it was abrupt?
Is just to go buy the bonds.
What would happen if they were abrupt?
Yeah, if they were abrupt, I think we would see. Here's our choice. We have short-term pain for long-term gain, or we have short-term kind of like not misery necessarily, but short-term or a medium to long-term kind of problems, and then massive pain. And so if I were in charge of the Fed, which is why they will never let me be in charge of the Fed, I would go for the short-term pain.
That's what they do with addicts, by the way. That's why you go for a 5 or a 7 day, whatever it is. I don't know. I got to go out to Betty Ford. I don't know how long withdrawal takes. But the issue is withdrawal is painful, but it's better to get that over because you can't unlearn. Your body can't get back to its original muscle memory until it's over.
That's right. We've atrophied. And this inflation is here to stay. One of the problems with inflation is once it starts, then if you're worried that the price of that car or the price of a gallon of gas or the price of a loaf of bread is going to go up next week, you're going to buy it today. And so what happens is that once inflation gets entrenched and people expect it, they start spending money faster and faster, and then it's harder for the Fed to fix it.
Oh, this story on Florida real estate from the Washington Post.
Yes.
It's gone through the roof. And it's just
hyperbolic.
Yeah. And people then just say, well, I better go buy a house right now, right?
That's exactly right. And then what happens is the Fed has to fight even harder to stop it. So if they actually drained money, interest rates would go significantly higher. The market's going to have some issues here as we digest this.
I'll tell you, Brian, I hope they make you head of the Fed someday, the next Republican president, because having a monetarist like Volcker, that's what Volcker did. Someone's going to have to do it. Someone's going to have to do it. It's going to be the next president, I'm afraid. Brian Wesbury can be followed at Wesbury with First Trust Portfolio. Smart guy. Listen to him. I'll be right back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Morning, glory, America. Bonjour. Hi, Canada. Hugh Hewitt live today from California. You always have to have your eye out, if you've been in the business as long as I have, for 30 years, for new political talent. So I got a call last week that Jeremy Hunt had entered the fray in Georgia for Georgia's 2nd Congressional District. And I read up on Mr. Hunt, and I said, I got to get him on. And so he's here. Jeremy Hunt, welcome to the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Hello. It's an honor to be on with you.
Well, you're easily honored then, but that's not the case. The key is I'm glad you accepted. I want the whole country to find out about you, Jeremy, and support you. Your Twitter handle is @TheJeremyHunt. Would you give people the brief rundown of your history and why you have decided to throw your hat in the ring?
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. Yeah, so I'm Jeremy Hunt. I'm a West Point graduate and former Army captain, and I served my country and deployed to Ukraine for a period of time, got back, got married, started a family, and now I'm looking to serve my country in a slightly different way here in the halls of Congress. And so we are running for office here in South Georgia. And this is a community where we live here in Columbus, a community that just deserves better. And so we are here running against a Democrat incumbent, a 30-year Democrat incumbent, who has been here kind of in the community where he has wasted over $100,000 have gone missing on his watch. And over the 30 years, families have suffered here. And so we are running to give a new voice to our community and parents across this region. We're running to preserve the American dream for my daughter and families like mine across the state and ultimately across the country. We need people who are willing to stand up and say, I want to serve, and I'm ready to give voice to people who have been long forgotten.
Now, Jeremy, I have long said, and my buddy Noonan, who works for Cotton, and I agree, that if the Republican Party is going to re-energize, it has to go out and recruit young men and women who have served under the colors, who are new to politics, because I don't want any more 55-year-old state legislators deciding they want to finish their career in Congress. God bless them all. But I actually want some people who go there and intend to stay there and work change. So who talked you into this? Because it's not easy. And I don't know what Mrs. Hunt thought about this, but she must have taken some persuading.
Yeah, so my wife, God bless her, I was completely blown away that she went along with us. But honestly, ultimately, we feel called to do this. This wasn't something that we just woke up one day and said, oh, we're going to just jump into this political fray. We feel particularly called that we are here to serve others. That is what our life has been about. It's what our marriage has been about. It's been about that selfless sacrifice. As you know, for so many families, military families, it is a whole family sacrifice, been giving so much for their country. And our approach to politics is very much the same. It's a sacrifice, but it's a worthwhile sacrifice. And we care deeply about our country. We care deeply about our community. And we want to run a race that first shows people that, look, the conservative movement is not dead. We have energy here. We have a new vision for our country, one that is worth listening to, and we're going to go and ask for every vote around here. I mean, so we are excited about it. We care. We know that we have the advantage, and that people are looking for something fresh. And so, and we're here to give them that opportunity.
Now, Jeremy Hunt, what year did you get out of West Point?
2015.
2015. So you did your 5-year commitment, and you got back to Georgia, and you looked around. Tell me about the 2nd District. I don't know where it is. I don't know what cities are in it. You mentioned Columbus. Is it a D4? What's the district? Have the new lines come out? What's the political lay of the land?
Right. So after redistricting this past year, the district is now about D+3, D+4 in that range. So well within the range of
Sure.
flip. And the incumbent is very vulnerable. This community, you have to come down here and visit. It is amazing. It includes Macon, Columbus, Albany, and kind of the main cities in the area. We have a rich agricultural community, but it's also a very vibrant military community as well. We have Fort Benning, we have Robbins Air Force Base, and so it's a very strong military community. We have a strong agricultural community, and there also is a very interesting kind of racial dynamic at play as well, where half the district is black, and the other half, about 40 to 45% is white, with other kind of diverse races in there as well. And so one thing that we're doing in this campaign is specifically talking about how we bridge that gap and how we bring in new voters into the conservative movement, and how we share with them, look, the Democrat Party has left you behind. All of these years, I mean, they have such a bias against agriculture, against such a bias against rural communities. They think they know better than American families. They've sowed such division over these last years, and so we're going around talking to so many people in our community, and everyone's saying the same thing. Like, yeah, we're just sick of the same old line. I mean, we had
Jeremy Hunt, let's start with the deepest division. I've got a son-in-law, and nephew on active duty in the Navy, so go Navy, beat Army. And so I don't think you've got any Navy bases in the 2nd, right? The deepest division of all is we got to get that clear.
The biggest base that we have here is Fort Benning, which is a strong Army community, I'm proud to say.
Let's go to the other division. You're an African American running as a Republican. Are you getting any blowback from the community of blacks in Georgia who you are asking to vote for you? Do they say, you can't run as a Republican?
I think that it's just been so many years since, I think they've seen a lot of black conservatives standing up and saying, look, we're ready to get into this fight. It's been a while. So, there's always that kind of initial kind of talk like, hey, no, I'm actually just one of you. We're here. I believe in this country just like you do. I believe that families and parents deserve, to have a say in how we run this country, and that's why I'm running. And so once we talk about the values, that is what bridges the gap. Once we talk about religious liberty, once we talk about, no one should be mandating that you have to get this vaccine. I mean, once we start talking about those kinds of issues that people care about, they couldn't care less that you're a Republican, or they don't care about the label. They just want people who are willing to stand up and fight for the values that have made our community strong, the values that have made this nation the greatest nation on earth. And so those are what, and that's ultimately what's going to win us this race. The Democrat Party, if they are going to really help us in this next year, because what they're doing is just going around repeating the same old line about racism and how America is just, doomed forever. There's no hope that we are that not only does racism exist in America, but America was created for white supremacy. I mean, that's the message that they're going around telling people. And I'm telling you, the jig is up. People are sick of it.
Now, I agree with that. But I think biography wins races. I think your bio is amazing. How did you end up at West Point, Jeremy Hunt? I mean, what path took you there?
Well, I grew up in a Christian home. My dad is a pastor, and we grew up, and my parents were always all about service. It's all about serving others. I can't tell you, how many, different football games my parents probably missed because they were visiting people in the hospital and going giving food to people who needed it. And so we were always kind of grew up. I grew up in that environment, and so I always knew that service was the key. It's not about me; it's about others. And so naturally, that landed me, looking at how can I serve my country. And so, of course, I looked at the Army. So I joined a program called JROTC, which is like a junior Army kind of training program. And so shout out to everyone listening today who was ever in JROTC. It's wonderful. I highly recommend. And we're going to love this part, Hugh. I had 2 Army instructors who were retired, a retired first sergeant and a retired lieutenant colonel. And they pulled me aside and they said, I don't know what you plan on doing with your life, but you, and I was just a freshman in high school at the time, they said, you are going to go to West Point. You are going to be an officer in the greatest army in the world, and you're going to lead soldiers.
I love that. I love that. That's leadership. So what is the website, Jeremy Hunt? How do people get involved with your campaign?
You have to visit jeremyforgeorgia.com. That's Jeremy, Jeremy, for Georgia.com. I would be honored if you would make a contribution, sign up, join our fight. We are standing up. It's something bigger than ourselves. We are going to flip this seat and retire Nancy Pelosi. This is our opportunity. We have a window here, and it sends a message that the Democrat playbook of race baiting, of division, is over. It's broken, and if we win this seat, that's the message that we're going to send to Washington.
Is Kevin McCarthy, who's a friend, is he helping you? Is the NRCC behind you?
Look, we're pulling in all the support we can. We are asking for anyone who wants to contribute, anyone who wants to get behind us. We can use the help. So look, this is a big tent campaign because it's going to take all of us, all hands on deck.
Yeah, you're at the top of the Hugh Hewitt list, and even if you are an Army guy, we can disagree one day out of the year on the football game day. But I'm just a civilian, so I salute you for your service. I am very glad your hat is in the ring. Thank Mrs. Hunt and your daughter for me, and go Jeremy. The Jeremy Hunt on Twitter, JeremyForGeorgia.com. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Today marks the end of Joe Biden's first year in office. He has been in office exactly 1 year. Tomorrow is his first anniversary, so the end of the year is today. There is no better person. Actually, I don't think there's any better person in the country to discuss this with than Molly Hemingway. Molly, of course, has authored the brand new bestseller, Rigged. She's authored Justice on Trial with Carrie Severino. She is on Fox News all the time on Special Report. I have yet to grace the panel with her. I'm looking forward to that. Hello, Molly. Thank you for joining me on the anniversary or the end of the first year. How are you doing?
It's great to be here with you, but what a year.
What a year. Now, last night, I don't know if you're going to be on special report tomorrow night. I'm going back tomorrow. But last night, I got to point out that key numbers are 28 and 14. 28 Democrats are heading for the exits in the House. 14-point swing in the direction of the Republicans in Gallup. And a 5.7% lead in the generic ballot for Republicans. What is the biggest source, or what are the many sources of the demise of the House of Pelosi and the fall of Joe Biden?
Well, I keep thinking back to what we were told prior to a year ago, that by electing Joe Biden and other Democrats, that adults would be in charge, that our policies would improve, that the health of our country would improve, literal physical health, but economic health, our foreign policy stature. And I think what we've all experienced over the last year is, regardless of where we were on the issue of Biden versus Trump, we know that we were completely lied to about the quality and competence of not just Biden, but Democratic policymaking in general. They have control of not just the presidency, but the Senate and the House. And so what we're getting is pure, unalloyed Democratic policy that doesn't have much disagreement on the Democratic side of things, Democratic Party side of things, and people are not liking it very much at all.
Now, Molly, I have one, and I'm not blowing smoke at you, I have one observation. Since President Trump left office, the public intellectuals representing the Republicans in the public square have undergone an evolution. And I just tweeted out a number of these people, not only you, but M.K. Hammer, Mary Catherine Ham, Morgan Ortagus, Monica Crowley, Katie Pavlik, Dana Perino, Shannon Bream, Martha McCollum, Carrie Severino. They're all very much younger than my generation. I'm 65. You know, I've got a few years left, but I'm not going to be around for much longer. People like Guy Benson and you and Dana and you folks are more combative than my generation was. Rush was pretty combative, but do you agree that maybe our side is getting better at making the argument, as Maggie Thatcher said, first you win the argument, then you win the vote?
I think, yeah, maybe more combative, also just more aware of the who the enemies are. I keep thinking particularly about our corporate media environment, where for decades, literally going back to Eisenhower, you had Republican politicians complaining about bias, but not really doing that much about it. And I think as much of our media has become more entrenched in their propaganda and partisanship, you're seeing people recognize them as an opposition to conservative thought, not just bias, but an actual political actor. And so these are one of the things that we learned from recent years was the need to tackle that head on. I don't think it's just Trump. You saw a precursor to it in some other politicians and media figures of understanding the need to really battle the people who are putting out the false narratives, news that's made up or invented in one way or another, and to not be shy about the importance of fighting those things.
You know, I trace it to Newt Gingrich challenging John King in a 2012 debate. I believe that began the turn towards recognizing that an arm of the DNC exists in legacy media. I call it legacy media because it's not just television. It's not just the New York Times. It's people who have always been there, always on the side of the Democrats, and now it's out in the open. Let me ask you what you think happens next with that new combativeness, because part of that combativeness is not controlled, and part of execution is controlling passion, right? Do you think our wilder side is coming under the influence of people who are practiced and efficient in their critiques?
Well, you're absolutely right that you need to be prudential in how you tackle these things, and that doesn't happen when you have unbridled passion. But I do think it's just sort of the basic minimum that conservative voters and a lot of independent voters are asking is an ability and a competence in tackling false media narratives. But that's not it. I also think it's that we've had quite a bit of a policy update, not really a fundamental change in our way of understanding the world, but you've seen a policy update on the Republican side of things to be much more focused on national interest, on middle-class issues of concern, and again, an understanding that much of the establishment has completely destroyed much of the culture. And so these things aren't contrary to the way that the conservative movement was going before, but it's definitely a much-needed refresher and update, and that's as important as the ability and willingness to fight the media.
I want to talk to you about two specific data points. First, polling. I was asked by President Trump after the election what I thought had happened. And I can't tell you what he thought. That's off the record. But I explained to him face to face. I believe the election was lost by him because of the Wisconsin polling done by Washington Post ABC, which showed he was down 17 points. I believe that actually lost him the election. It was down by, he lost that state by a handful of votes. That had a dampening effect. So I think the media is an active player, but I also hate the Presidential Debate Commission. Do you think that Ronna McDaniel's initiative, led by David Bossie, is going to stick? That Republicans will kill off the the Debate Commission and simply redo this whole rollout that we had to live with for the last 20 years?
So there have been problems with the debate commission going back quite some time. What happened in 2020 was an abomination, whether it was killing the foreign policy debate, which was one of the big successes of the Trump administration. They didn't have that debate, and they didn't have really any questions about foreign policy. They had so many bad moderators over the years, all of them with bad questioning. So I wouldn't even say, I mean, the RNC is smartly responding to the destruction of the Presidential Debate Commission that it did to itself. And that is just, I mean, they were truly horrible. But I think, again, Republican voters are not tolerating anymore this way second-class treatment that conservatives get from so much of the corrupt establishment. And they're saying, we will not tolerate that anymore. So if the Republican Party wants to have a voice going forward, it simply has to fight these battles because their voters are done with not fighting them.
That is correct. Now I want to turn to the second key demographic, and it's my daughter. She's smart. She's raising 3 kids with another one on the way. She's a military family. She looks to Bethany and Bethany Mandel and many others like M.K. Hammer and yourself who are actually articulate. She's not a political activist. She's never been. She's not that way. She was a patriot. She's smart. But she is so upset with the way the schools have run. I think the Democrats have lost moms in a way that we are only beginning to glimpse. Do you agree with me?
Oh, Hugh, you look at what happened in Virginia, which was entirely a parents' election. But this week, when Glenn Youngkin said, the new governor of Virginia, that he believed parents should be in charge of their children's education, and he did not get supported by the Democrats in the chamber that he was addressing. The Wisconsin Democrat Party put out a notice saying parents should not have a role in their children's education. They later retracted that and pulled back. But we're clearly seeing a divide here, and it's a very different from what we've normally seen, where I think a lot of times parents did feel comfortable in the Democratic Party. The more the Democratic Party is beholden to its fringy base that wants to write parents out of curriculum and out of other, decisions about whether to mask their children, you're seeing people just find a normalcy in the Republican Party that is appealing. And I think that explains that 14-point switch that you were talking about a few minutes ago. I
do too. I also think it may be a national security election. And I think that because Putin is on the edge of invading Ukraine, weakness is provocative, and China is just a horrible place, and the scales have fallen off. If there was one grand foreign policy achievement of the Trump years, is that Secretary Pompeo, National Security O'Brien, and the president, of course, himself, and Vice President Pence, they all woke us up. I don't think we're going to go back to sleep on the Chinese Communist Party, Molly. Do you?
No, but I mean, that was a major and massive change in the public perception of whether China was an ally or an adversary that really needed checking, both in terms of its economics and military strength. But there was so much too that cast of characters you just talked about did, whether it was reorienting our foreign policy in the Middle East toward a peaceful posture between Israel and its Arab neighbors, making sure Russia was not engaging in aggressive behavior, which it did under George W. Bush, under Barack Obama, and now again under Biden, because as you note, that weakness or it can be provocative, whether it was checking Iran, getting NATO to take more of a role in its own defense against Russia. All of these things were important, and they've all been seriously harmed in the last year by not having a cohesive, coherent foreign policy, and of course also with the disastrous manner in which we pulled out from Afghanistan.
Oh, that I had forgotten even to mention that. So let me close on this question, Molly. Rigged is doing very, very well. I think the Democrats have fundamentally misjudged the American public on elections. They're not buying this. They know it's nonsense. Moreover, they don't like drop boxes. They do not like unsupervised mail-in. I think they don't like ballot harvesting. I think they like voter ID. I think fundamentally the country is with the Republicans. You wrote rigged. I hope people get it and buy it. Do you agree with me that the Democrats have fundamentally misjudged the American electorate on this point?
Yeah, the polls show that Americans very much want secure voting, whether it's 80% that support voter ID or other common sense measures to make it slightly difficult to cheat. It should probably be much more difficult to cheat, but easy to vote. And for the Democrats' messaging to be that if you support voter ID, again, something that 80% of the country supports, that you are a Jim Crow racist, that is obviously not resonating. But it's also just really disgusting rhetoric that should not be put out there, and is very harmful to the cause of having elections that we can trust, that both winners and losers can trust, but also the important issue of not stoking racial division and hatred, particularly on such an important topic. So I don't think they're going to succeed, but with their attempt to water down voting integrity or to federalize elections, but it still is bad that they've been engaging in this type of rhetoric.
It is the charge of the light brigade without any of the honor, because it's just light when it comes to IQ. I think it's the dumbest political season I have seen ever. Molly Hemingway, thank you. Always a pleasure to talk to you. Rigged is her brand new bestseller. It's in bookstores now. You can get it at Amazon. You need to be as smart as Molly is about elections and follow. I'm just making a list. We're winning the transition. There's always a baton passing, right? I'm 65. I can do this for another decade, maybe 5 years, maybe 7. But eventually, you got to look out and see that there's got to be another generation of people to make the case. And I actually think the rising generation, and I just named the women. I haven't even mentioned people like Guy Benson and Larry. I'll even give Larry. Should I give Larry should I say Larry O'Connor is good at his job? No, I won't say that. But the combativeness, it's coming. It's here, and it's good. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt, joined now by Pete Peterson. Pepperdine School of Public Policy is the great lantern of the West, standing out there in Malibu as a beacon of freedom, and Pete leads it. Pete and I have a disagreement, though. I hate the independent commissions that are redistricting, and I wanted a worthy opponent to argue this with me, and Dean Pete, and you should follow him on Twitter at Pete4CA, is one of those worthy opponents. So, Dean Peterson, good 2022 to you. Make your case, because I hate these things. I think they violate the constitutional delegation of authority to the legislatures.
Well, Hugh, happy New Year from Malibu. I'll just quote the former last Republican governor of California, Arnold Schwarzenegger, who made the case back in 2008 to California voters on Prop 11, which was the Independent Redistricting Commission proposition, in which he said, in redistricting is the only instance in which politicians actually choose their voters, and it really should be the other way around. So at Pepperdine, we say we're about putting the public back into public policy, and I think putting redistricting into the hands, taking it out of the hands of politicians and putting it into everyday voters is really the right direction to go.
But you know, Pete, I watched Colorado's very closely because they thought it was a fairly stacked commission. Arizona screwed us. California screwed us being Republicans. So I watched Colorado, which apparently is the closest to fair. But when they say fair, they mean 50-50 districts. That's not what the framers intended. The framers intended legislatures to hash this out and for the voters to decide. One man, one vote, one person, one vote was a necessary standard. Getting race out. I wrote about this for the Post this week.
Yes.
Why not trust the people with whom we have some recourse? We cannot do anything about these commissions. We have no recourse over these commissions.
Well, I would say at least in California, this was initiated by ballot proposition. So it was something that did come from the voters themselves. They voted it in 2008 here in California. And I wouldn't say that the goal is 50-50 districts. We're certainly seeing, at least in the new maps that have come out from the California Redistricting Commission, a tightening up of the races. But Henry Olsen also had a piece in the Washington Post in which he argues that actually California Republicans stand to do better than most think in the 2022 elections under these new maps. There certainly are a tightening of a couple districts, but even so, the newest districts across California, the tightest district is a +4 Republican district for Michelle Steele. Everything else is greater than that, either on the Republican side or the Democratic side.
But again, I'm not toning up W's and L's. I think it's actually going to be a wash nationally, and the red wave is going to carry us to victory. I'm actually going to the core principle, Dean, which is when you go to these independent commissions, they say they're nonpartisan, or they say they are balanced. They are never not partisan. You cannot take partisanship out of these commissions, and we can't get to them when they screw us. So fundamentally, isn't that a walk away from representative democracy?
Well, in the California case, it certainly is an instance where you have much more Republican representation at the table than you would in the deep blue legislature. In this instance, you actually have balanced, same number of Republicans, Democrats, and a +1. It's 5, 5, and 4 independents. So there's a reason why the two or the three greatest opponents to independent redistricting in California back in 2008 were Nancy Pelosi, then Senator Barbara Boxer, and the entire California Democratic Party. Those were the listed top three opponents.
I would have been fourth, because I hate the idea that representative democracy is falling prey to initiatives. I want to give you the last word, but I want to point out the best redistricting in my lifetime was 1990s, where the Republicans and the Democrats in California compacted the district, nested 2 assembly seats in every Senate seat, and actually made and that came out of a partisan chamber, deeply partisan chamber, because they all wanted to take care of themselves. I mean, it's self-interest. And if we didn't like it, I mean, this is just a blue state. Dean, you have to live here. I've left, but I'm back for vacation in January because it's cold. Do you think this is actually ever going to change anything in California with the maps that we got?
You know, I think in the end it's not. I think Henry Olsen is right that the national red wave, even with these new maps, is still going to benefit Republicans. I think Republicans are going to come out with some more congressmen and women than they would have had otherwise. And I think, to your point, it is a bit of a wash. But to the broader principle which you're arguing, and I think it's very fair, but I would just say that I would rather have that in the hands of everyday Californians, and in this case, I think California does do it well, as opposed to Ohio, which has the governor, auditor, and secretary of state, and I mean that's not quite.
And just got thrown out by the Ohio Supreme Court on a 4-3 vote. Dean, I'll leave you this.
I wouldn't call that independent either. So,
if you have a debate on this at the Pepperdine School of Public Policy, invite me and invite some other originalists, because
you have Henry come in Malibu. Here.
I know that. You know, someday you're going to make me an offer I can't refuse. I'm just going to move back. Pete Peterson, always a pleasure. Follow him at Pete4CA, and if you're going to go to a school for public policy, go to Pepperdine's. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Generalissimo. I'll be back tomorrow, America. Will there be a new British Prime Minister? Not yet, but it might be underway by then. Talk to you tomorrow.